I am Zephyr Alden, a man shaped by the weight of responsibility. Each day starts before dawn, my alarm clock piercing the fragile silence of 4 a.m. The factory, a labyrinth of machines and unrelenting noise, beckons me, promising another 12-hour shift filled with sweat and strain. Yet, I endure. For my family, I would endure 1,000 lifetimes of toil. My wife, Lila, is my anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering optimism are what keep me upright and my knees threaten to buckle under the load of our struggles. She stays home to care for our 2 children, Aaron, our 7-year-old son with eyes like the ocean before a storm, and Saria, our 4-year-old daughter whose laughter is a fleeting glimpse of heaven. Life, though harsh, was tolerable until that fateful afternoon. The call came while I was on my lunch break. The cafeteria buzzed with tired laughter and clinking utensils, but the moment I heard Lila's trembling voice, the world around me fell silent. "Zephyr," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Aaron collapsed at school. They're taking him to the hospital." I dropped everything and ran. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile hallways and beeping monitors. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was a mask of professional detachment. "Your son," he began, "has a congenital heart defect. He needs surgery as soon as possible." The number he mentioned next, the cost of the operation, hit me like a freight train. 200,000. An insurmountable wall of money that we didn't have and couldn't possibly gather. That night, as Lila sat by Aaron's bedside, her hand gently stroking his hair, I found myself outside the hospital, staring up at the indifferent stars. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms as my mind raced for answers. My job at the factory barely kept food on the table. The thought of working more hours seemed impossible, my body already ached from the endless grind. But as I stood there, the image of Aaron's pale face and Saria's innocent giggle filled my mind. If there was a way, I would find it. If there was no way, I would make one. The following day, I approached my supervisor, Mr. Victor Morgan, a man whose cold demeanor matched the steel he oversaw. "Mr. Morgan," I began, my voice steady despite the storm within me, "I need extra shifts. Night shifts, weekends, anything available." He arched a brow, his lips curling into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so devoid of warmth. "Desperate, are we, Alden?" I nodded, swallowing my pride. "It's for my son. He's sick." "Very well," he said, flipping through a clipboard. "But don't think for a second that I'll tolerate any slip-ups. You want the hours? You'll earn them." By the end of that week, I was working 16-hour days. The physical toll was immediate. My arms felt like lead, my legs like they could collapse at any moment. But it was the emotional strain that truly tested me. Coming home to see Lila's weary smile, knowing she was shouldering her own burdens in silence, kissing Aaron goodnight and pretending everything would be okay, watching Saria's drawings pile up on the fridge, each one more hopeful than the last, it was almost unbearable. Almost. Because when you're a father, almost is the line you never cross. You carry on, no matter what. And so, I carried on. Weeks bled into each other, each day indistinguishable from the last. The factory's rhythmic clanging became a metronome of my existence. I had pushed my body to its limits, and then beyond, my every action driven by a single goal, to save Aaron. But the cost of desperation is steep. And sometimes, it's more than just money. "Zephyr, you need to rest," Lila's voice, laced with concern, greeted me one evening as I staggered through the door. Saria rushed to hug me, her small arms barely wrapping around my legs. I placed a hand on her golden curls, managing a weary smile before collapsing onto the couch. "There's no time for rest," I murmured, rubbing my temples. The weight of my obligations bore down on me, heavier than any load I had ever carried in the factory. "What good will you be to Aaron if you break yourself?" Lila's voice cracked. She sat beside me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He needs you alive, Zephyr. We all do. Her words stabbed at my heart, but I couldn't let them slow me. I kissed her forehead, a fleeting gesture of gratitude and guilt, before retreating to the shower. The water was scalding, but it did little to soothe the aches embedded in my muscles, or in my soul. At the factory, the atmosphere was as unforgiving as ever. Victor Morgan's sharp gaze followed me, always waiting for a misstep. "Alden," he barked one day, pulling me aside. "You're slowing down. If you can't handle the workload, there's a line of men out there who'd kill for your position." "I'm fine," I replied, though my trembling hands betrayed me. The truth was, I hadn't been fine for weeks. Aiden's surgery loomed over me like a dark cloud. Every cent mattered, and every delay felt like a death sentence. I couldn't afford to slow down, not when time was running out for my son. That evening, as I drove home under a sky painted with hues of deep orange and fading blue, my mind wandered to memories of Aaron before the diagnosis. His laughter echoed in my mind, a sound so full of life that it made the present reality even harder to bear. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to catch my breath. What's happening to me? I wondered. My reflection in the rearview mirror was a stranger's, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in days. The man staring back at me was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. When I walked into the house, I was greeted not by the usual warmth of home but by an argument waiting to happen. Lila was pacing the kitchen, her hands wringing a dish rag. "We can't keep going like this, Zephyr," she said, her voice firm but trembling. "We need to ask for help." "Help?" I scoffed, throwing my jacket over a chair. "From who? The neighbors? The church? Everyone's struggling, Lila. We're not special. Victor Morgan. The factory owes you more than just overtime pay." Her suggestion made my blood boil. "You think Morgan cares about us?" I snapped. "He'd sooner let me die on the factory floor than lift a finger to help." Lila flinched, and I immediately regretted my tone. She turned away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I just want our family back. I want you back." Her words lingered in the air long after she left the room. I sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, the walls around me closing in. I knew she was right, but pride and fear kept me rooted. Asking for help felt like admitting failure, and failure wasn't an option. Later that night, I found myself standing over Aaron's bed. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one a reminder of how fragile his life had become. Saria's soft snores drifted in from the next room, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. "I'll figure it out," I whispered to him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I promise." But even as I said the words, doubt gnawed at me. The cracks in my resolve were growing, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold everything together. The morning after my whispered promise to Aaron, I stood at the factory gates, my breath visible in the chill of dawn. My body protested every step, every movement, but I pushed forward. Aaron's pale face was a constant presence in my mind. As long as he needed me, I couldn't falter. Inside, the factory roared to life, a cacophony of grinding steel and humming conveyor belts. I worked with a single-minded determination, but exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. By mid-morning, I had already fallen behind. "Alden." Victor Morgan's voice cut through the din. I turned to see him approaching, his face a mask of annoyance. "This isn't a charity. If you can't keep up, you're out." "I'll catch up," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Morgan narrowed his eyes. "See that you do." His words were a blade against my pride, but I swallowed my anger. Pride wouldn't pay for Aaron's surgery. The rest of the day passed in a haze of sweat and strain. By the time my shift ended, I was barely upright. As I changed out of my work clothes, a colleague approached me. His name was Elias. A wiry man with sharp features and a perpetual smirk. "Heard you're looking for extra cash," he said, leaning against the lockers. I hesitated. Elias wasn't known for his altruism. "What are you getting at?" I asked, pulling on my jacket. He grinned, a wolfish expression that made my stomach turn. "There's a way to make some quick money, if you've got the guts." "Off the books." "I'm listening." That evening, I met Elias in a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with smoke, and the clientele was rough around the edges. Elias introduced me to a man named Callum, a burly figure with a no-nonsense demeanor. "You need cash," Callum said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need muscle. It's simple work, moving goods, no questions asked." Alarm bells rang in my head, but desperation drowned them out. "How much?" I asked. Callum named a figure that made my heart race. It was enough to cover a significant portion of Aaron's surgery. "I'm in," I said, sealing the deal with a handshake that felt like a pact with the devil. The first job came 2 nights later. I found myself in a deserted warehouse. The air heavy with the scent of oil and damp concrete. My task was simple: load unmarked crates into a truck. Callum and Elias supervised, their presence a reminder that backing out was not an option. As I lifted the first crate, my back screamed in protest. The hours at the factory had already taken their toll, but I gritted my teeth and kept moving. Each crate was a step closer to saving Aaron. "You've got potential, Alden," Callum said as I hefted another crate onto the truck. "Keep this up, and you'll be out of your hole in no time." I didn't respond. This wasn't about potential or escape. It was about survival. By the time I returned home, the sun was rising. Lila met me at the door, her expression a mix of relief and worry. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice tight. "Overtime," I lied, avoiding her gaze. She didn't press further, but the silence that followed was heavy. As I crept into Aaron's room, I watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that both comforted and tormented me. "We're getting there," I whispered. "One way or another, we'll get there." But deep down, I knew the path I had chosen was a dangerous one. Each step forward felt like walking a tightrope, the abyss below growing darker with every passing day. The morning sun painted the kitchen in soft amber hues, but the warmth of the light did little to ease the frost between Lila and me. She moved about, preparing breakfast with deliberate, silent efficiency, her eyes avoiding mine. Saria sat at the table, humming as she drew on a scrap of paper, blissfully unaware of the tension that hung in the air. I clutched my coffee cup, its warmth bleeding into my fingers as my mind replayed the events of the past night. The warehouse, the crates, the silent pact with men I barely knew. The money I earned now sat hidden beneath the loose floorboard in the bedroom, a small but significant step toward Aaron's surgery. "Zephyr," Lila finally said, breaking the silence. "You're wearing yourself down. It's not just the factory, is it?" I froze, my grip tightening on the cup. "What makes you say that?" She turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "You come home late, more exhausted than ever. And last night. I heard you come in at dawn." "I'm doing what I have to," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "For Aaron." Lila's expression softened, but the worry in her eyes remained. "I know you're trying, Zephyr. But we need you here too. Aaron needs you to be whole, not broken." Her words stung because they were true. But how could I explain the choices I'd made without breaking her heart? Instead, I nodded, hoping to reassure her. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could be whole anymore. That night, I found myself back at the warehouse. The air was colder, the shadows longer. Callum greeted me with a curt nod, his imposing figure illuminated by the harsh glow of a single overhead light. "Got a bigger job tonight," he said, handing me a clipboard. "More crates, tighter schedule. Think you can handle it?" "I'm here, aren't I?" I replied, masking my unease with bravado. Callum smirked. "That's the spirit." Elias appeared moments later, his ever-present smirk in place. "Ready for another round, Alden?" he asked, clapping me on the shoulder. I shrugged him off, focusing on the task ahead. The crates were heavier this time, their contents unknown but clearly valuable. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but the weight of my promises kept me rooted. Halfway through the job, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Voices raised in anger, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Callum's voice cut through the chaos, barking orders to his men. "Stay here," Elias hissed, grabbing my arm as I moved toward the noise. "This isn't your fight." "What's going on?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "Police," Elias muttered. "Looks like someone tipped them off." Panic surged through me. If I was caught here, everything I'd worked for would crumble. I'd lose the factory job, the money for Aaron, and maybe even my family. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elias glanced at the back exit. "We run." The cold night air hit me like a slap as we bolted from the warehouse. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I kept moving. Behind me, the shouts of the police grew fainter, but the fear clung to me like a second skin. Elias led me to a small, dilapidated building on the edge of the industrial district. Inside, we collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "That was close," Elias said, laughing nervously. "Too close." I didn't respond. My mind was racing, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. This was no longer just about Aaron. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. When I finally returned home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark, but I could feel Lila's presence even before I saw her. She was sitting in the living room, her silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. "You're late," she said softly, her voice devoid of accusation but heavy with concern. "I'm sorry," I said, unable to meet her gaze. "Zephyr," she began, her voice trembling. "Whatever you're doing, it's tearing you apart. Please, just talk to me." I wanted to. I wanted to spill everything, to share the burden that was crushing me. But how could I admit to the darkness I'd stepped into? How could I ask her to understand? "I'm doing what I have to," I said, my voice hollow. She stood, her silhouette wavering like a shadow in the flame. "And what happens when you can't come back? What happens to us then?" Her words lingered long after she left the room, a haunting echo of the fears I couldn't face. As I sat alone in the darkness, I realized that the fire I'd ignited to save my family was threatening to consume me entirely. The tension at home was palpable as the sun rose, casting a pale glow over the kitchen. Lila and I barely exchanged words, the distance between us had grown since the night I returned late from the warehouse. Her silence was as heavy as the weight of my decisions. Saria, oblivious to the storm brewing, hummed quietly as she scribbled on a piece of paper at the table. I didn't want to face her, didn't want to face myself, but there was no avoiding it. The choices I'd made were eating me alive. My body felt like it was crumbling under the strain, but I kept moving. I had to. For Aaron. "Zephyr," Lila's voice cut through the stillness, sharp but quiet. "We need to talk." I turned, the words in my throat a weight I couldn't voice. But I knew this conversation was inevitable. "What's on your mind?" I asked, hoping to avoid what I already knew was coming. "I need to understand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're not the same. You've changed. The late nights, the secrecy. What's really going on? You're slipping away from us. I stood frozen, the silence stretching between us. I'm doing this. For you, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they sounded hollow. For Aaron. I'll fix everything. I promise. Lila's eyes softened, but there was a sadness there that made my heart sink. You're not fixing anything, Zephyr. You're destroying yourself. And in the process, you're destroying us. Her words were a gut punch. I had known she was right, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. I wasn't just breaking, I was breaking everything. And for what? A fleeting chance at saving Aaron when I could feel my own world slipping through my fingers. I'm trying, Lila, I said, my voice raw with frustration. I'm trying to keep us together. I don't know what else to do. I'm running out of time. Time is the only thing we have left, Zephyr, she shot back bitterly. But you're too lost in whatever this is to see it. I wanted to tell her that I could fix it, that I could change. But I couldn't. Not when I was so deep in this mess. I had no answers. Nothing that would ease her pain, or mine. The factory was no better. Every day, the pressure mounted. Victor Morgan's cold gaze seemed to follow me wherever I went, his silent judgment like a constant weight on my chest. He didn't just want results, he demanded perfection. And I couldn't even get through a day without barely scraping by. My body was a wreck, bruised, tired, sore, but I ignored it. Pushing through was all I knew. And if I had to give everything, even my own health, to get through it, so be it. I wasn't about to lose this job. Not when every second counted for Aaron. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, I was called into Victor's office. His eyes were cold, like the steel machines surrounding us, his voice as sharp as the grinding gears. Alden, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Close the door. I think we need to talk. I obeyed, heart hammering in my chest. What's this about? I asked, already bracing for the worst. You've been slacking off. Slipping, he said, his gaze unwavering. I can see it. You think I won't notice? You're not even trying anymore. I'm doing my best, I said, keeping my tone as even as I could. Your best isn't good enough, he replied. His voice dangerously quiet. If you can't keep up, we'll have to part ways. My blood ran cold. My mind raced. I couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not with Aaron depending on me. I won't let you down, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound resolute. Victor studied me for a long moment before nodding. See that you don't. Now get back to work. I left his office feeling like I had just narrowly escaped a nightmare. But the weight of his words pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I had to be stronger, faster. Every day felt like walking a razor's edge. But what if I couldn't keep balancing? What if the fall was inevitable? Later that night, after I got home, I found myself staring at the empty space between Lila and me. She and Saria had long since gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, mind racing, replaying the argument from earlier. Every word Lila had said echoed in my head, a constant reminder of how far I had fallen. But all I could think about was Aaron. His pale face, the quiet beep of the machines, and the constant reminder that time was running out. I couldn't stop now. Even as my own body screamed in protest, I couldn't stop. I had to save him. But did I even know how? The next morning, I woke to Lila sitting at the edge of the bed, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Zephyr, she whispered, her voice breaking, Aaron's condition, it's worse. The doctors, they don't think he'll make it through the night. A cold wave of panic surged through me, freezing me in place. I wanted to scream, to ask her to take it back, to make everything go away. But the words wouldn't come. I rushed to Aaron's room, only to find him lying there, his breath shallow and ragged. His skin was the color of ash, his small body frail and lifeless. I sank to my knees beside his bed, my heart aching with an intensity one couldn't explain. I reached out, taking his tiny hand in mine. "Please, Aaron. Please don't leave us." But I knew, deep down, that it was too late. No amount of money or effort could reverse the damage. The weight of every choice I had made, every hour I had spent chasing something that now felt so futile, crashed down on me. The hours that followed were a blur. Lila stayed by my side, but there were no words left. No comfort I could offer. We watched in silence as Aaron's breath slowed, his tiny chest barely rising, before the soft beeping of the machine ceased altogether. The moment he was gone, a part of me died with him. I cradled his lifeless body in my arms, whispering apologies, but the guilt I felt was suffocating. "I'm sorry, Aaron," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I couldn't save you." Lila collapsed beside me, her grief raw and uncontrollable. And I could only hold her, feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I had failed. The funeral came and went, a blur of faces and hushed condolences. But none of it mattered. I had lost everything. I had failed him. My son. The days afterward were hollow. The motions, work, sleep, eat, felt like an endless cycle I couldn't escape. I had tried. I had given everything, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And the silence of that grief weighed heavier than anything else. I thought of all the promises I had made. But they, too, were lost in the ashes. The journey was far from over. I had nothing left to give, but somehow, I would keep going. I had to. For Lila. For the memory of my son. But in the dark quiet of my despair, I knew one thing for certain: it would never be the same again.